Right, good afternoon. First off, let me start by thanking the ITF, and particularly Stephen, for considering our small startup to present in this event. I learned a lot this morning. And also to thank our hosts. My great-grandfather was Chinese. He immigrated to Mexico 100 years ago, so happy to be here in this country. I'm going to tell you a story about how we're trying to transform transit in a very complicated environment. I'm sure that I don't have to convince anyone that vehicular congestion in Mexico City is terrible. If you want to start a lively conversation with any Mexican, you can ask about tequila, tacos, or traffic. And the reality is that it keeps getting worse. And over the last decade or so, as sustainable mobility has conquered the space in the public agenda, there's been a lot of stuff done to really entice people to get out of their cars. But it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because we have essentially two transit systems working alongside each other. On the one hand, you have centrally planned, highly subsidized, and relatively small mass transit system composed of the subway and of the DRT. 200 kilometers of track of subway, 100 kilometers of dedicated busways on DRT, which essentially reach only half of the territory of Mexico City. So how do we manage to have a high mode share for transit? Well, with the existence of another system of mass transit, of public transit, I call them the jeepneys, but there are a great variety of different kinds of vehicles. What holds them together is that they're loosely regulated, very atomized industry. They don't always play by the rules. They negotiate to find their own space as to what standards of service should be offered. Funny enough, similar to Uber or to TNCs in this context. Well, 11.5 million trips every day take place on a Jetty. And these vehicles are perceived as unsafe. Women get constantly molested on board, and they become less accountable as you get further away from the central areas of the city. And yet there are kind of a magical system that self-organizes, same self-plans, and moves people to where they need to go at a price people are willing to pay. So this is the challenge we're facing, right? 90% of people in Mexico City polled report feeling insecure in transit. 22% of women also polled stop using public transit altogether due to fear of being a victim of a crime. So it's really hard to make a credible argument for somebody that commutes for an hour or 2 hours a day that you should leave your car at home and you should actually ride on the bus. It's simply not an attractive sale. So the question that we're trying to address is how can government make collective mobility more attractive than private mobility? Especially in a context where local authorities in Mexico have already discarded the possibility of using pricing as an alternative to raise funds to invest in transit, and where it's abundantly clear that all of the subsidy pesos that are available are spent on the subway or the BRT system and not in the jeepneys that actually move a much larger share of the total population. So when we were thinking about what are the alternatives that we could offer to try to make an alternative more attractive, we were thinking about what are the different goals that a government might have as when they're trying to craft the regulation to pursue, right? And you could think about goals relative to accessibility, goals that Rex discussed about affordability, trying to address externalities, and so many other goals that any given government could have in thinking about how to regulate emerging services. In the case of Mexico City, it has long been clear that the only goal that the government will actually push when dealing with the jeepney industry is affordability. So they have very cheap fares, unsubsidized, and that has created an environment in which, vehicles are old and drivers are overworked, and you have this vicious circle in which service continually gets further deteriorated. In that context is where we're playing. So I often hear stories about Bridge or Chariot or other so-called microtransit companies in the US. We're a very different animal. We are trying to inject accountability to an unaccountable system. We are trying to offer a safer, more comfortable, more reliable experience to what's already on the ground. And we're trying to do this without demanding a subsidy from the government. So we developed our own app, completely home developed. We were inspired by what was happening in the TNC and the microtransit space. I described a little bit of the details on the paper. And we essentially tried to offer commuters in Mexico City the most direct route possible, the certainty that drivers will be background checked, that the vehicle will have a proper insurance policy, that the passengers will have enough information to know whether or not their bus is running late, or whether or not they should be standing on a perhaps dangerous spot very early or late at night, the certainty that they will travel seated, and that they will pay roughly half or more the price of a comparable taxi or TNC ride. As you can see, this is not fancy stuff. It's, the fact that people will be able to travel seated, for example, is something that you would expect from a transit system, but it's something that we simply do not have. And that passengers have learned to travel without much dignity. I like somebody else was mentioning that a lot. So what are we? We are, our license in the Mexico City metropolitan area is actually the same license as a TNC. When Uber came in, they lobbied forcefully the government, and they were able to get a very lenient regulatory framework. So we came in and we pitched our service and said we want the same permit as they had. And the city was forced to grant it, then tried to deny it. And the paper has some more stories, some more details. But it's been a very challenging process to get the permitting. But we're currently operating and growing quite rapidly, and you'll hear more about it. We're a microtransit company. Micro to what? To the jeepneys? Or so I don't really like that term. In the sense that we're not trying to plug into a subsidized mass transit system and try to divert some of those subsidy dollars for us. We're actually trying to get passengers that are willing to pay for certain features of the service a cheaper alternative than going all the way for a taxi ride. I kind of like the Indian concept of bus aggregator. This company Shuttle, that's how they refer to themselves. And it fits well with our business model, in which we do not own or hire any of the passengers or the buses. But it is actually traditional jeepney operators that are now giving a way to tap into a market that they are losing, that are providing the services for us under our standards. But the name is not perfect, because we have vans, we have a few taxis, and we have buses, so private collective transport alternative. And if anybody has an idea of how to define it, I'm interested to hear. So how does Jetty work? Passengers engage with our app. Let me just highlight this. This is the Mexico City metropolitan area. The lines are the subway and the BRT network. And you will see how most of that system is within the central area of Mexico City, the jurisdiction called Mexico City. But half of the population lives outside those boundaries, and you'll know that there are no subway lines that go into any significant distance into the metropolitan area. Most of those people still commute into the central core of the city, and for distances that do not work for cycling, and in areas in which they cannot take advantage of the city's subway or BRT. So most of our coverage areas are located outside of, are located in those transit deserts, areas that are not well served by the subsidized centrally planned system. The circles you see over there are areas in which you can find a Jetty pickup point under less than 2 kilometers away. So how does Jetty work? Passengers download our app. They see a map. They don't see a fixed schedule. They don't see a fixed transit, a traditional transit map. They input their origin and their destination, which we then use to fine-tune the location of our pickup and drop-off points. And they're offered a set of trip alternatives. They see the price, they see the location of the pickup and the drop-off points. Once they make their selection, they will get information as to where and how to walk to the pickup point. And if they purchase a ticket using a debit or a credit card, they will get the ticket with a picture of the driver, the license plates of the vehicle, and so on. And once the driver starts making their way, they will be getting notifications along the way. So one of the big triggers for our entry into the Mexico City market with this idea was this sense of inequality that's being deepened by the way technology has been implemented to improve transit. So it turns out that if you can afford Lyft or Uber or Cabify, then you get drivers that open the door, that you feel safe, you get a water bottle as a gift, maybe they'll get off and they'll help you with your luggage. But if you can't afford that, the only alternative you have, if you live outside of the mass transit shed, is the colectivos in which women are groped, in which people get assaulted, in which you travel as a sardine. And we don't think it's fair that the regulatory context in the city allows that inequality to get more deeply ingrained. So we thought, how about using the possibilities of technology to insert some of the regulatory minimums that the city has not been able to enforce? What if we make the pitch to the jeepney industry that if they commit to a certain level of vehicle, a certain level of driver, a certain level of performance standards, then they get to charge a little bit extra for their services? And that's essentially the space in which we're operating. If you see in the graph, you'll see the cost for a 23-kilometer trip, both in time and in money. And you see that there's this huge gap between what TNCs are charging and what the public transit is charging. And we think that there's a space there for a company like Jetty. So we had three main challenges when we were launching. Number one, developing the technology, doing something simple enough to be able to launch quickly. And we were able to get that. High quality developers, Mexican developers that have put together an amazing set of apps. Second, get a permit, and it's a little bit of the story that I already told. I went and talked to the ministers of transportation in both the metropolitan area and Mexico City, and trying to convince them that this was a net gain for the public interest, and we got the permitting process started. But they did make one big caveat. In both jurisdictions, they told us that in order to operate, we better get the buy-in of the incumbent minibus industry. And this is a powerful, entrenched industry that the authorities, for very rational reasons, do not want to get in a fight with. After all, these guys move millions of people without demanding a subsidy. And for any transportation minister that doesn't have a viable alternative, that's very valuable. So Pepe and I spent a lot of time talking to the leaders of the minibus industry in Mexico City, trying to convince them that they could earn more money, dignify their public image, and actually expand their market if they participated in this. So the first 6 months, we were trying to make this pitch. Our business model is essentially taking a percentage of every peso that gets in. Most of the money gets paid to the transport operator, that then pays the drivers and pays the financing for the new buses. All of our buses so far, and our vans, our taxis are new. And we are working at this moment with 4 different jeepney associations and starting to grow very rapidly. But that wasn't the case at the beginning. We announced that we were launching our first Jetty service. And you'll read about it in the paper, but essentially we got hijacked by about 30 guys. And most of the team were in the 2 vans that got hijacked. We had goodie bags for our first passengers. And we saw some guys waving, and we assumed, of course, that they were our first passengers. But then the guy whistles, and we're surrounded by about 30 mobsters. They're very protective of their informal property rights. They are very concerned in an industry that usually muscles itself in about new guys, tech or not, that are trying to invade their market. And but the expression of that resistance also materializes in regulatory action. So it's not only about violence in the street, the stories that we've heard about, when Uber tried or other TNCs tried to get into markets. It's normal to get some pushback from the incumbent industry. That shouldn't surprise anyone. But what is surprising, and it's kind of sad actually, is that a month after we have this incident, the Mexico City government published new regulation outright banning shared rides. I tried to make the best translation possible in the slide, but essentially it says that you cannot use an app to facilitate the trips of 2 or more people that do not have the precise same origin and destination. And we have to sue the government because there's no public interest rationale for that regulation. And there's no way that could survive any deep analysis. Why wouldn't you want people sharing rights? Right? Why wouldn't you want technology that may improve the quality of service? We have to sue the city, and we're currently in that process. They've allowed us to operate while the lawsuit is settled. But the sad thing is that we have to spend a lot of our very scarce resources in the first months lobbying, muscling, paying lawyers, and so on, rather than focusing on improving passenger experience and improving the performance of our vehicles. What we did manage to do in the last, since January, that things really settled down, was that we were able to prove 2 very important things. Number one, that people are willing to pay and to return to the service as long as you can demonstrate that you can offer a comfortable, safer, and secure commuting experience, and that many of them will leave their cars at home. And I'll give you some data on that. And second, that the jeepney companies, the transport operators, are happy that they're getting more control over their drivers, that they are getting better use of their new vehicle fleets, less intense in terms of tear and wear and so on. And they are regaining a market that they already lost. People use transit as a last recourse, and as soon as people can afford a motorcycle or a used car, they will leave transit forever. So we're becoming a barrier towards that mode shift. So how are we trying to scale? And I will give you one very quick case study. With this company, SB Bus is the only company that's permitted to run in the elevated highways of Mexico City. And they had a very terrible problem. They were permitted to run up to 40 vehicles in the elevated highway, as long as they purchase new, fancy, large buses and offered service for roughly 50 cents. So what that created is a service in which there's probably 20, of course the numbers didn't work to run the 40 buses, there were probably 15 buses running, and the service was so scarce that there were 20 to 30 minute queues in the early morning, that you can see the picture on the left, because the passenger experience is very different if you're the first one in the queue that gets the seat, than if you're the guy at the end of the queue that will get crammed with approximately 70 other people to make the unit economics work for the bus operator. So we started working as a reservation system. So now people can work through the app, pay their ticket, don't have to come in early, and get access to a guaranteed seat and other stuff that I described. But that's not the only thing that we're doing with SB Bus. The other thing that I'm really excited about is that even though we're not an on-demand service, we are a demand-responsive experiment. So since we get information on the origin and the destination of passengers, and we have a bi-directional communication platform with our passengers every day, we get all the complaints and all of the nice ideas. And they're telling us that the SB Bus service, for example, will drop them off at a point at which they will need to grab a collective taxi to get to their final point, that taxi ride was more expensive than the original ride, and that something similar was happening in the point of origin. So now we've redeveloped the whole planning program, the whole operational program of SB Bus, and we are now having direct buses to probably 4 or 5 different destinations that vary probably by 1 mile or 2. So we're still mostly a fixed route, but we are demand responsive, and we're trying to do that more and more with the rest of our fleet. Another example, if you go to any subway station in Mexico City, you'll find some guy that's shouting, offering collective taxi rides. And that essentially means that you queue, as you can see probably in the pictures in the left, for some time, and then you're offered a shared ride, an illegal shared ride on a taxi, and in conditions that are unsafe, because drivers doing the shared ride shifts are driving very rapidly in order to do more rounds. So we have an experiment going on with some of the associations that are doing shared rides this way, to ask them to do that through the app. And that's being increasingly successful in the case of Mexico City as well. So we're finally growing. These are certainly not the numbers that you see from other startups, but when I wrote the paper, it was late September, we were very proud that we were selling 25,000 seats a month. Well, the October finished yesterday, and we almost hit 40,000. And our total number of seats sold was 80,000 a month ago, and we're now at 120,000 in the whole of our experience. So we're starting to grow rapidly. We finally cracked the code on the jeepneys. We have a list of jeepney associations that want to explore potential partnerships with us. And we're getting some encouraging feedback, and I'll just briefly mention some of that. So we're growing rapidly. Different to Uber or other TNCs, this is a daily commuting experience. 20% of our users have used us more than 20 times. Retention rates are quite encouraging. 80% of our users keep using us 15 weeks after first trying it. We use the same start system as many startups. We have, we get very encouraging feedback from them. But what most excites me in a forum like this, people from the industry, but also with regulators and people that are interested in sustainable mobility overall, is that we've proven, at least through our polling data of our users, that a very large share of our users would have traveled by a TNC, by a car, or by a taxi if Jetty didn't exist. So it's actually very encouraging to think that we can actually help reduce congestion by getting people off their single occupancy vehicles. 49% of our users would have traveled by car, essentially. 90% are very happy with the experience they got. 87% consider that Jetty is better than their other transportation alternatives, including when they're driving. And I have a few conclusions that I'd like to share to them that I'm hoping will somehow get inserted into the document that you are preserving. At least that's our position on how these new services should be regulated. I think we've proven so far that the quality of service provided by the jeepney industry, at least in a context like Mexico City, and a disclaimer is that it's clearly a different environment than what you would find in other ITF cities, can be dramatically improved if you properly incentivize drivers and owners. All of our drivers have benefits, they have fixed salaries and so on. If you enforce tight standards and if you respond to passenger feedback. Number two, that it is actually possible to improve the quality and to increase the coverage of public transit without committing to significant capital infrastructure investments or operational subsidies that are often not possible in fiscally constrained environments. And number three, that a significant number of commuters are willing to forego less sustainable individual transport modes if a safe, comfortable, fast, and reliable share ride experience actually exists. I think that's a justification for encouraging more companies like ours in contexts like Mexico City. So we have three asks for regulators. Please don't impose standards on startups that you do not enforce on the incumbent industry. A very close friend of ours made a public challenge to the transport minister a few months ago over a public radio. And he said, I'm just seeing a jeepney right here, and I challenged the minister to tell me in the next 20 minutes whether or not it's properly insured, what's the name of the driver, and who owns the vehicle. And if the minister is able to give me the answer, I will resign from my radio post. The minister, of course, declined to comment. Second, please craft a framework that protects the public interest and will all into security, safety, and many of the things that we discussed today. But let's craft it in a way that a sandbox is left open for us to try new things. It's really tough to try to make things work, particularly when you're running on low funds. And finally, let's give commuters more options. Let's give the public, especially the large share of the public that cannot afford TNCs and ride-sharing services, an opportunity to enjoy the benefits of technology. I don't think it's fair that we keep accommodating services for regulation for the better off without doing the same for people that are forced to suffer the regular jeepney industry. This is our challenge. I'm very encouraged in the last few months of what a very small team with very limited resources has been able to achieve. We're growing rapidly. We have transformed our relationship with the gym industry from one of conflict to one of fruitful partnership. And hopefully in the coming months, we will settle our lawsuit with the city and we'll be able to return next year with more stories to tell. So thank you very much.